Before we go further into the story of what happened with Jesus and these trials and all, and before he went into the Roman trials, I'd like to go over this a little bit more deeper, a little more in depth about what it was like and who these Sanhedrin, or whatever the pronunciation, Sanhedrin, were, and also what was the house like, maybe, of where Annas was, or Caiaphas. So we have, if you remember, it's probably in this region where Annas was, and then Caiaphas, and it seems like all the trials were right in there. It doesn't seem like they did their normal thing. If you remember in the last video, I drew a sort of a picture, a diagram of the temple proper. This is a huge temple, court of the Gentiles, and then you had the court of women, court of men, and then you had the court of priests. And in the court of men, basically, rather than the court of priests, are right in that area. Probably right there is where they normally would hold a court case. That also changed, by the way. It wasn't always there. But anyway, and they didn't even go there to do it, it doesn't seem. And so they had their trials there. And Annas, not sure how long he was there, but when he went to Caiaphas, or Caiaphas is a lot of the pronunciations that's used. What was a house like? Well, a typical house at that time was something like this. I'm going to try and draw it here. Maybe while I can maybe show it to you while I'm doing this. Here, I'll get this marker. Yeah, so, we're not sure. And this, to me, and from my understanding, these guys were rich. They were getting rich, and that's one of the threats that Jesus was to them. Remember, he threw the tables over, and he really cleaned out their merchandising, and like, don't make this house of like a marketplace. If you remember, he said, my Father's house should be a house of prayer, and not what you guys are doing anymore. I think they got a lot of money for that. Well, these were the chief priests, Annas and Caiaphas, and so probably a lot of the houses, whatever their house was, probably double what I'm going to show you. But a typical house of a person who had some money, well, most of the time in Galilee particularly, and maybe in Judea too, there could have been just one-room houses. Or it could have been like 2 rooms. This is very typical, just 2 rooms, poorer houses. Probably most houses were something like that. Or they could actually... they can also have a third thing here, like this, where they had a room here, and they entered there. So 3 rooms like this. But anyway, this one is different. The ones that had what's called palace, or the courtyards, were, I don't know which way to draw this. I'll do this for right now. I don't know if I could draw this really great, but here's kind of like what it would be. See if I can do this. Way down here, I'll do this. It's a little awkward there. I'll go here. Yes, all right, so I missed it a little bit. All right, so what they would do is you would have the door, the entrance to the house here. One door, not anywhere around there. They usually had a window over the door. They didn't like a lot of windows because they want privacy. Particularly, they didn't want people looking into their house and looking at their girls, their females, their women, the moms, the wives. And so you had usually probably a good sized square or something, a porch. They called that a porch. It's actually inside. Maybe there was no, it's possible there was no roof at this thing, but it looks, this is what I've understood it to actually be. So maybe there's a wall there, and then you walk in, it's still open, or maybe it was like porched in, like a wall, ceiling over it, a roof. But anyway, then they had benches. They had benches along here, or whatever. They had the entrance to their big court, which we'll get to later. And then they had this thing here, like another room sort of thing, maybe something like this. And they had stairs that maybe go up. This is where they went up on the roof. I don't know, maybe I was wrong in the past. Maybe they didn't have stairs on the side. Maybe it's more inside, so that you had to go inside to be able to go up. And there was, like I said, a door here on that X right there, which they could have locked and secured. But they had like stairs that way, or maybe even stairs this way. those lines right there, those little lines, are like steps going up, and then you go on the roof. But for right now, we'll stay on the lower level. And some houses had 2 levels, but usually it's 1 level. And then you had like something that did something like this. You would have a room here like this, and then you'd have a room that goes over, let's say, to here. And then you have this room that goes all the way to here. Although this should be more square, maybe I should do this differently here, or maybe even this one too. I might even have to start over. But like here, let's bring this over more. Let's do this, something like this. This is probably more accurate. Yeah, something like this. And then you have, okay, something like this. Okay, there you go. And then you have this more square. It's even more square than I have. I probably should put this out further. And what you have here is you have an entrance. Let's do this differently. Let's see. You have the benches now over here, and this is a doorway right here. You walk in, and then you have an open courtyard, a big courtyard right there, big open space. Now, that actually they actually had it open so that you could see the sky and all, or they also had a canvas or an awning or something that you could roll up. They were tightened really strong with ropes, and you could cover that whole place right there, that whole central location. And in rainy times, you could have that, you know, that all closed up. I guess rain would hit that thing, and I don't know, I guess hopefully it would, maybe they lifted it up more and the water slid out, I'm not sure. Or if it's cold or something. And so they had this big heavy duty canvassing that you could tie really tight thing here so that you could open it up or keep it closed. By the way, if that might remind you of the story of the paralytic guy who they lowered down in the midst, it says right down there. And maybe if Jesus was here or something, or maybe here or wherever, they would walk on the roof. Remember, that was so crowded they couldn't get in there. They could walk along the roof. They would go up the stairs, go around the thing, and then unroll that part, untie it. And then they had a banister on either side. They'd have a banister on this one, a banister on the inside, about chest level high, where they could have a railing so they might not fall. And maybe, I guess, ever so often you have a pull there. It's just more of a secure thing. If you're about to slip, you can hold on to it. And Jesus, and they actually, in Luke, it literally says something about that being broken up, maybe the tiling or something, or maybe it was literal tiles or something in certain places. But they would open that up and drop him right in front of Jesus, not drop him, but lower him with rope, like, you know, a lot of rope. They would take something like this and they would lower him, you know, right into Jesus. Anyway, and, you know, there's a lot of stories about people on the roof. There was the Samuel talking to Saul, or there was Rahab. And of course, that was a city wall, but she hid the spies, you know, the Christian spies, well, not Christian, but the God's people, the Hebrew spies. Or there was Peter praying in Acts 10, you know, on the roof. So they loved going on the roof, especially in hot days and warmer nights. They would go up there sleep. And there was David that went on his roof, you know, and saw Bathsheba bathing, you know. But anyway, then you have all these rooms. Like here, let me add this other room here. This is a typical, you know, pretty good, pretty well off person. They'd have an entrance to that room. They have an entrance to that room. They have an entrance to that room. So you have the courtyard here. Sometimes they even have fountains, a water like fountain that sprung up right there. These are probably more, you know, richer people. Annas and Caiaphas may have had something way more elaborate than this, but it kind of gives you an idea. And then you have a room here. Then a lot of the times this is the women, like guests or something, maybe a guest room. The katulama is what it's called in the Greek. Or if you had several wives, you know, that has happened before. They put them back there. And then you have another room here, and then you have another room down in here. So that kind of gives you an idea. And so later, when we talk about Peter being there, well, he's probably in this courtyard right here. while the priests, or I mean the high priest and the chief priest and all that, maybe one of these rooms is where the court was being held. And the Sanhedrin, by the way, typically, first of all, this word Sanhedrin means a sitting down. It means assembly. It means council. Let me go into that a little bit. I have some pretty cool stuff to show you about what these Sanhedrin was. This court group is sitting together is what it actually is. So here's what the Sanhedrin is. The word means sitting together. Can you see that? Or it also can mean council. So the Bible a lot of times uses that word, and it's probably Sanhedrin in the Greek, but the English word they use is council, and then also the assembly. Now, there's three major groups. I've talked about them many times, but there's three: chief priests, scribes, which are the teachers of the law, and the elders. Pharisees made that up a lot. The priests were more of the Sadducees, those group, and the Pharisees were more of the scribes. And the elders were just older, wiser men that came on that. So for my studies so far, they had to be elected to get on there. There's 70 or 71 or 72. I talked about that before. And then there were smaller Sanhedrins, smaller court judges. And there were actually two others, as far as I have understood so far, in Jerusalem. And you went into the one, and then you went into the other one that's kind of raising up, and then finally you got into the Supreme Court, the highest Sanhedrin. So that's pretty cool. They all had to be fathers. They all had to be men, and they had to be fathers. And I think the concern there in the writings was, you had to be a father because of some of the family court cases that would come up, issues, the domestic, which is family, and they would have more understanding of how to judge the fathers or the mothers and things like that because they had kids, like with their children and all that. So they had to be fathers. That was a rule. And then you had 3 or 4 major players, I'll call them leaders. You had the president of the Sanhedrin. This is a big thing. They were the high priest. They were the chief priest, the chief of the chief priests. There were chief priests, but there was one really high one, and he was high priest. Now, they were supposed to stay in that position until you died, and then your son would take it. That's how it was in the Old Testament. But Rome came in, and they chose who they wanted in there, and that really irked. It really got them upset. The Jewish people say, we're supposed to have who God has put it. They didn't care. The Roman government made them, they chose, and they kind of probably interviewed and talked to them, and they chose ones who became sort of their puppets. They were weak, or they just wanted to please them, or maybe they gave them money and bribes, and who knows what's behind all that. But that was a real problem. But anyway, there was a president or high priest. They're called Nasi, maybe, which means prince or elevated one. And so there's several. So here's some of the things that the high priest had to do. They represented the civil and the religious things. And just to make it try and simple for the younger ones here, this court cases came up about property or this or whatever, then they'd have to make a ruling. They came to court, maybe an argument between 2 families or 2 whatever villages or something, and they had to they took the harder cases that the other towns in Israel couldn't do, and it went to the Supreme Court. Just like in the United States of America, we have a Supreme Court. There's lower courts, there's federal court, there's local courts, there's state courts, various courts. Well, they had the same sort of hierarchy, same sort of thing. And also religious issues, real different opinions and things like that. They would have to judge murder cases were there, and also other religious issues and things like that. And they had to represent the Jewish people and to the Romans and all the Jews throughout the land, the synagogues and all that. They were the highest court there. And see, there were smaller Sanhedrins in the synagogues where you had a small group of men who took care of the lower cases, not so difficult cases. They were definitely the highest seat, the highest position. they kind of summed up the whole Sanhedrin voices. They were the one voice that kind of spoke on behalf of all the other voices of the Sanhedrin. And then you have they also determined certain traditions, and they kind of led the whole group and all. And by the way, the Sanhedrin is spelled many different ways. Just like a lot of words in the ancient times, they were spelled a lot of different ways. So that could have been an M and an N and other various ways. Then we had the vice president. He was called the Abethin. Ab has to do with father, Beth means house, and Din has to be with either law or judgment. So their title was the father of the house of judgment. That was their meaning of that word, Abethim. See, we have Nasi and Abethim. And they basically were a lot of the leaders of the discussions that were going through the court, like, the talk about a case and everything. So they led the discussions. They also helped control the arguments. If it kind of got heated and arguing, he would step in and control it. The vice president had authority to do that. Then you had the number 3 place, which is he's a sage, which usually it means wise, referee. And he kind of helped maybe, as well as the vice president, he was I don't know how to pronounce that, Kakim or Chakim, which is the wise one. He kind of prepared and formed the topics for the day. He kind of wrote out and prepared what the different cases were going to be. So he was doing legwork or work behind the scenes, and he also and then the next one were 2 recorders who kept notes during the thing, and they actually knew shorthand. So these 2 were kind of taking notes of the cases, just like we have today. Anyway, they had daily sessions. They worked every single day for 6 days of the week. On Sabbath they didn't work. There were no court cases, but on 6 days, Sunday through Monday in their calendar, they worked, and they started right after the morning sacrifices. And I think the morning sacrifice happened in the beginning, when the high priest or one of the priests would say, go up to one of the pinnacles, kind of higher place in the temple, and see if the sun is coming up. It was early in the morning. And also see if the sun hit Hebron from Jerusalem, which is, 15 miles south. And if you could see the sun hitting that, now's the time to go get the lamb and set it up. And we'll go into the sacrifices a lot more detail later. It's a very interesting study on how they did it, what they did. But it was early in the morning, right after the sacrifice, the morning of that lamb and the goats and the cattle and all. Then they would start their cases early in the morning, and they would go to the evening one. As far as I can tell right now, the evening sacrifices happened basically at 3 o'clock. It was kind of headed for the evening. And so then they would stop the cases. So they did it 8-9 hours a day of sitting daily in those cases. And then also they sat in a semicircle, semicircle. I guess, I know most of you know what that is, but in case there's a younger one who's listening. But they sat cross-legged, and they sat on like a little carpet, like some sort of carpet or something. But it was kind of like this. I'll kind of draw it. And they sat like this. A lot of courts do that today. Like they did something like that. And then they would have the cases come up here, and they would sit like this in that arrangement. And so they sat cross-legged. They weren't sitting in chairs, and they sat kind of down. That was the Sanhedrin on how they held their court. And I already said they had more difficult cases, and they came from positions of their native towns. Like they came from all over places. They kind of raised up in higher positions and all. And so I think that's all. I think I'll just mention a couple more things just briefly on this, and that is things such as, here's our trials, and then I already told you about this one pretty much, and then Caiaphas and others. I think what I'll do is I'll pause on this at this moment, but I want to talk more about these 2 cases, and this is so important. I mean, I think I'm doing a lot of talking about this because it's really amazing what Jesus went through, and he did it for you. He went through all this muck. He went through all these lies, and he stood quietly. Now, he did speak some, by the way. He actually talked for a little bit to Caiaphas. and he was asking them different things. But that's not in the book of Matthew, and we'll get into that later, the more details on what he was talking to them about. And then he said, why don't you, they heard me. This is what Jesus did. He turned the thing towards, hey, I'm not going to defend myself here. The people that are in this room, they heard me teach and all that. Ask them. And that's when all these witnesses came up and they started doing, nobody collaborated. I mean, they just couldn't get their stories right. These were rascals. These are scoundrels. These are mean people that they chose. They lined up. And again, like I said on the last video, the Sanhedrin made sure they didn't get anybody that loved Jesus or knew the truth about Jesus. They got liars, and they just couldn't. In every story, not one story ever matched up with the other one. Even the one that we're going to get into on the one story that's recorded, one of the witness things that was recorded, and they were quoting Jesus wrong. And the Bible even says, and they didn't even say the same thing. Nobody could get the exact witnesses. And when that happened, you just can't have, there's no witnesses. None of them were any good. And so that's when Caiaphas finally just was exasperated. He was like, we can't get him. So I'm going to ask you straight out. And that's what we're going to get into in probably the next video. And so it's pretty neat. By the way, I will say this, one other thing that I happen to think of. When it says all the Sanhedrin, and remember what I said? I don't think all of them were there, but the Bible says all, and it just hit me. I thought, you know what? I think what it's saying is all the council, all the assembly, these Sanhedrin, what the whole place spoke against Jesus. There was not one good voice. It seems like it's not recorded. I mean, these are highlights here of what happened. Not one place literally said anything good. And so I think, and it was late at night, they picked and chose and selected who they wanted to come. Remember, they had to have at least 23 for a legal case out of the 70. And I think several of them weren't there. It's possible that Saul, the Paul character in the New Testament, might have been in this thing. I don't know. But he might have been there. It's not mentioned there, but he's brought up later, in the book of Acts, and starting at 8, 9, and all that. But what I'm saying is the whole Sanhedrin talked against him. The whole group came together of the ones that they chose. Or there's another way of looking at it, by the way. When I say all, a lot of people say, let's say you go to a baseball game or a sporting event or whatever game, and you go, man, everybody in the school was there. Well, not everybody, but the whole school came out. Or the whole city went to see the fireworks. Or it's an exaggeration. It's not like every single person. So when the Bible says things like that, that's kind of like how we talk. They say, man, there's a lot. All of them came. Or all of them, with this or whatever. Do you understand? So that's another thing that I would like to say, that when the Bible says things, some people are so, they have to say, well, every single person. Well, that's not what he meant. It's just like what we talk, how we talk. Like the all of them came to the assembly. Yeah, some people were absent because they were sick or at home or whatever. All right, God bless you, and keep studying with me, okay? All right, bye.